1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. My name is Andreas Werner. I'm a record producer, songwriter, and owner of Crazy Chester Records. The theme song you just heard is performed by Wet Willie's Jimmy Hall and Funky Chester. The Crazy Chester Radio Hour is a weekly music talk podcast featuring an eclectic group of guests with musical hearts, minds, and souls. And many of the episodes will dive deep into the rich history of music mecca Muscle Shoals. My guest today is Dickey Lee. Dickey is a member of the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame with many #1 songs to his credit. His signature song, She Thinks I Still Care, has been recorded hundreds of times, including classic recordings by George Jones, Elvis Presley, Anne Murray, and Leon Russell. As an artist, Dickey had a string of rock and roll hits in the 50s, including Patches and I Saw Linda Yesterday, before having success as a country artist in Nashville. Dickey, welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Andreas. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. You grew up in Memphis. What's your earliest memory of music?
Oh boy, my earliest memory of music was listening to the Grand Ole Opry when I was in junior high school, and on the radio to get the Grand Ole Opry down in Memphis, and I loved country music, and I kind of evolved into rock and roll because Elvis came along in the mid '50s, and I really got into that too.
Was that when you started becoming a musician too?
That's about the time I got started. Actually, it was a little before that. I bought I remember my first guitar I bought at a pawn shop. I think it cost $8, and it was a Stella guitar. You ever seen a Stella?
Absolutely.
And the strings were about an inch off the fretboards, and I didn't know any better, and they were just killing my fingers. But I'm left-handed, and it was a right-handed guitar, so I bought this guitar, and I changed the strings around. But that was... So I got started, and I learned these country songs off the radio, get some of those old country song books, and just play those old country songs. I remember my favorite artist back then was Webb Pierce, and a big country artist back in the 50s, and that's what got me going, I guess.
Yeah. When did you start writing your own songs? Was that fairly early on?
Well, I started writing then too, and I didn't think much about it. I wasn't thinking about, I want to write songs. I was just writing these songs. Of course, they were horrible songs, back then. But I wrote a few, and of course, wasn't doing anything with them, just writing them for myself. And I later on, as I got into high school, that's when I really kind of got into the rock and roll, because Elvis was a big influence on me as far as just changing my mode of music. But I never stopped loving country music. I've always loved country music, and in fact, I had a rock and roll career, and then I later on had a country career as a recording artist.
Yeah.
So I've done a little bit, and a songwriting career. So I've done a little bit of everything, I guess.
So you were still in high school. Was music already a path that you thought, well, that might be my life, or is that something that kind of gradually evolved?
I think when I got in high school, I thought, boy, this is what I'd really love to do. And, I think, it was such a dream. I never, you don't when you're really wanting to do something bad, you really don't see the obstacles or anything. It's just man, this is what I really want to do, and that's kind of the way I thought. I never thought about doing anything else. In fact, that was the only two jobs I ever had outside of music. I was a lifeguard, and I worked at a truck lines couple of years, loading trucks on the docks when I was going to college.
Yeah, but fairly early on, you got other people in the industry interested in you as an artist too. How did that happen?
Well, when I first started going after I got out of high school, I went to Memphis State University, and I had my own band and was playing these college and sororities and fraternity gigs, and just kind of around the Memphis, the local area. And I went to there was a disc jockey back then. His name was Dewey Phillips. Had a show called Red Hot and Blue, and all the kids loved him. So I went up to his show one night. It was on the second floor of a hotel, and I just went up there and waited for him to get off the air, and asked him if he'd listen to a couple of songs, and he did. He said, "Yeah, I'll listen," and I played a couple of songs for him that I'd written, and he said, "Those are pretty good songs." He said, "Have you got a band?" I said, "Yeah, been playing around some." And he said, "You get your band, and we'll come back up here, and we'll record them in the radio studio." It was WHBQ radio. And we did that. Later on, I got my band in the studio, and we recorded it. And he got it with a little label, and it was a local hit, a song called Dream Boy, backed up with Stay True Baby. It was a two-sided hit. And it came out the very same time. They released it the very same time that Elvis had, RC had released, I think it was All Shook Up. And my song followed his song all the way up the charts. I was one slot behind him all the way. He went to number one, I went to number two. And I never got to number one because he was always ahead of me. But, and it was in those local charts in Memphis, gosh, probably for about 20 weeks or something, just a really long time. But that was my first record. And through that record, Dewey Phillips got me on Sun Records. And that's how I got to Sun.
Yeah, and you have many more hits as a rock and roll artist too in the late 50s, and on different labels. But after that, you decide to come to Nashville, and the second half of your artist career, as you mentioned, was mainly country music. And you mentioned earlier that you've already listened to country music. So how did that transition happen for you? Was that something natural? Is this something you had to force somehow?
No, well, I was, when I was doing rock and roll, I remember I would sing country songs for some of the performers that were friends of mine backstage. I would sing them my country songs, There were a lot of rock and roll acts that really loved country music. For instance, a couple of guys, Lou Christie and Brian Hyland, they loved country music. And later on, in fact, I brought Lou came down here, and we went to the Grand Ole Opry together. I got the Shirelles on the Grand Ole Opry one night, but I should have been a booking agent. But anyway, that's the whole time I was doing my rock and roll. I was really digging country music. And then, I had met when I was on Sun Records. We didn't have any hit records on Sun, really, but the cool thing about being on Sun, it's so known over the whole world, the label is, that just being on that label made you a star in other countries, just being on Sun Records. And so that was a great thing for me.
There's a huge legacy there with all these great performers, and obviously Sam Phillips.
Yeah, and the engineer at Sun Records at the time was Jack Clement, who worked for Sam. We got to be really good friends, and that's how I got to Nashville. When Jack left Sun, eventually went to Nashville, he got me to come up to Nashville. and I didn't have any trouble, doing country because I'd always loved country anyway. And they signed me. I got a deal with RCA Records, and I remember and they signed me as a rock and roll artist, really. And I was probably one of the few rock and roll artists that that'd been signed in Nashville on RCA. But I went to Chet Atkins and I asked him if I could do some country music, and he said, well, give it a try, and it worked. So we had a lot of hits on RCA. I recorded for RCA from 1970 to 1980, and we had a lot of hits and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, and on some of those records, you could hear still a little bit of a rock and roll thing.
Oh yeah,
Never Ending Song of Love is to me an example.
9 Million Tears. A lot of those songs were, they had a little rock in them, but country radio accepted them, so it worked out for me.
Yeah, and you're so well known as a songwriter, but you also managed to record a few songs by other people. You had Rocky by Austin Roberts, and Never Ending Song of Love, which was a Delaney Bramlett song. How were some of those songs selected?
Well, that Austin Roberts, he didn't write that song. It was written by a guy in Springfield, Missouri, but Austin had a pop hit on it. It was, actually the song came out and nothing happened. And somehow my producer, Roy Day, was my producer, Roy, at RCA at the time. Somebody had given him a copy of this song, the publisher actually. And I love the song Rocky, and we recorded it, but it was strictly for the country market. And when our song came out, it really took off. And when it took off, they got back on Austin Roberts' record in the pop field, and his record also became a top 10 record. But his record, I don't think would have happened if it hadn't been for my record happening country, which was, that was kind of weird and kind of neat.
Absolutely.
And Austin and I, we're good friends today. We got to know each other and been friends for years.
Yeah. Now, even before you started your tenure on RCA, you wrote what's probably your most signature song, and that's She Thinks I Still Care. Were you still in Memphis when you wrote that song?
Yeah, I was. I was in Memphis, and I was writing for Jack. I was writing for his publishing company. Wrote the song, and he got it to George Jones, and George had the first record on it. And George had a big record with it, and I thought that was the biggest success I'd ever had as a songwriter. And I thought, once the George Jones record was over, that was, it was over. The song was over. And I mean, since then, countless artists have recorded that song.
And it still gets recorded all the time.
It really does. It's just amazing. It's amazing. I remember George Jones recorded this song. I think he had a hit record with it in 1963, I believe it was. And I know by 1975, my Canadian publishing representative told me there had been over 500 recordings on it. And today I couldn't begin to tell you, but I've even pitched it to people and they said, hey, I've already done that song. But it's, it seems like everybody in the music industry's done it almost.
Yeah. Obviously one of the most recognizable recordings is the one by Elvis.
Yeah.
Did you knew Elvis personally growing up in Memphis, or what was your connection to him?
I met Elvis. Yeah, I met Elvis in Memphis while I was recording, and he'd invited me out to his home, and I'd been out there some, and we were, we got to be good friends, and he encouraged me a lot, and in fact, he told me, I'm trying to get my years straight. I know. After I'd known him for a while, after George Jones, this was maybe 7 or 8 years after George Jones had recorded She Thinks I Still Care. Elvis told me one day, he said, hey, I'm going to record that song of yours one day. And I said, really? I said, well, you were the first one it was pitched to. And he said, well, are you kidding me? And I said, no. And I had actually given it to a guy that had worked for him. And he said, I want to get this to Elvis. And he said, I don't know what happened. Evidently they never got it to him. But the way Elvis heard that song, there was a disc jockey who was a close friend of Elvis's in Memphis by the name of George Klein. I don't know if you're familiar with George or not, but George would send, when Elvis was in the Army, George would send him records all the time, knew the hits that were happening over in this country. And Little Willie John had a record of that. It was a real soul record on it, and he sent that record to Elvis, and he heard it, and that's what really got him knocked out on the song. And he eventually did it. In fact, he recorded it twice. He had 2 different versions of it. They've both been released in albums. First one was in Moody Blue, but they came out. They released an album on him last year called The Jungle Room, and it actually had 3 cuts of She Thinks I Still Care on the same album. And what they did, they had the original cut, then the second cut he did, and then they had a lot of his outtakes that they put on the album, and She Thinks I Still Care is one of the outtake cuts also. So it was like having 3 songs in one Elvis album, but they were all the same song, which is probably pretty unusual.
Yeah. Another great recording that I love is Leon Russell's version.
Oh, yeah.
That's one I like particularly. Now, earlier you mentioned Cowboy Jack Clement as somebody instrumental in your career, but somebody you go back long ways to is Alan Reynolds.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of people know him for being Garth Brooks' producer and having a lot of success doing that.
Right.
How did you hook up with him?
Well, we were both, I was going to Memphis State University. It's University of Memphis now, and he was going to Southwestern in Memphis, which is Rhodes College. And when I put a band together, I had a bass player, and he was going to move or something. He couldn't do it, so he recommended Alan. So Alan, that's how I got Alan in my band. And actually, he started singing. I had a couple of 2-3 singers in the band, and they were all from. Alan introduced me to a couple of them. They were all from Southwestern too. So I had a neat rock and roll band and had 3 background singers, and that's how Alan got to really be in my band and become a large part of it. And like I say, we would play these college fraternities and sororities around the Mid-South at some of the schools. And Alan and I got to be very close. And then when I went to Sun, of course, he was in my band, and Alan and Jack and I really hit it off. So later on, when Jack moved to Nashville, he got Alan and me to move to Nashville too. That's how we got up there. So Alan and I actually came to Nashville together. Okay. And we came up here really to do a lot of writing too.
Yeah, and
of course I didn't know Alan, and he didn't either. He didn't realize he was going to be Garth Brooks' producer. So that worked out pretty well for him.
Absolutely. Now, there's this. I think it's a really neat story because it's also one of these songs that develop an afterlife. You wrote a song called Memphis Beat that Jerry Lee Lewis recorded.
Yeah.
And you told me that he even named his band the Memphis Beat.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about how that song came about?
Well, Alan and I wrote that too with a friend of ours. His name was Mitt Addington. And he's a guy that we would write with some when we were in Memphis, and he was actually a university professor. He taught psychology, and we wrote together, and the 3 of us wrote that song. And Jerry Lee, we got it to him. It was always around the middle 60s, and he recorded it and put it out, and he named his band the Memphis Beat. And later on, nothing great happened with it. Jerry Lee recorded it, and we're talking middle 60s. Well, back about 2014, I started getting BMI royalties on Memphis Beat, and I thought, where in the world is this coming from? Because this song, we're talking 40, 50 years ago, and found out there was a cop show, a TV cop show called Memphis Beat, and they used that song for the theme song, and up until the present, I still don't know how they got it. I figured they just went in the archives, looking for songs, and they found this song with the same title as the show, Memphis Beat, and it worked for them because it kind of had a real Southern musical background in it, and it lasted for a couple of years, and we got some nice royalties off of it. But another great thing about Memphis Beat was in 2014 they had a contest in Memphis, the top 100 songs written about Memphis. And I mean, there have been some great songs, and Memphis Beat was the #1 song out of the top 100. So I thought that was really cool, since Al and I were from there, and had the #1 song about Memphis ever written.
Yeah. And Cat Mo performed it as the theme song of the
right,
TV
yeah.
show.
He was the theme. He did the theme for the TV show.
That's, to me, it's just like one of those great stories where, like, technically the story is already over, but then there's a new chapter being written about a song that happened a long time ago.
Oh, it's amazing, yeah. I mean, that was just like She Thinks I Still Care. Who would have dreamed, when it first came out in 1963, people would still be recording it today. So that's one nice thing about the music business.
Yeah. There's many other great songs he wrote, and many of them went to country #1 too. And I would just like to name a couple of my personal favorites, and I'm wondering if you might be able just to kind of tell the story behind it, if there's any. And one is "The Door Is Always Open" by Dave and Sugar. How did that one come about?
Bob McDill and I wrote that song, and I don't remember what idea we got to write it. Bob and I wrote a lot of songs together, and that just happened to be one of the songs. And I remember I took it to Jerry Bradley, who was the producer and running RCA at the time, and he was producing Dave and Sugar, and he liked the song for him and cut it. And that was, I believe that was, if not their second. If not their first, it was their second #1 record. And we had a few more. We've had a few more records on that. Jamie Johnson did it a couple of years ago, and then Waylon recorded it. A group called Tennessee Pulley-Bone recorded it. So it turned out to be a nice copyright too.
Yeah, and another one is "Keeper of the Stars." Tracy Byrd recorded that in 1994, and it became another #1 hit.
Yeah. Well, that's probably one of my favorite songs that I've written, because it's about my philosophy on life, because I'm a believer, and we wrote it. And there were 3 of us actually that wrote the song: Karen Staley and Danny Mayo, who died a few years ago, and myself. And I remember Danny, we were writing one night, and he said, "I got this title, and I don't know what to do with it." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "The Keeper of the Stars." And I said, "Man, that's a great title." And I don't know how. I mean, it had to come from God. I just said, when he said that, I just said, "It was no accident, me finding you," and that got us started on it. So we wrote it, and we were having trouble trying to come up with a good bridge on it, and Danny got Karen Staley, and she got with us and came up with the bridge idea, and it worked out. It was I think it was Tracy Byrd's biggest record ever.
Yeah. You just mentioned that you're a man of faith, and although you're not necessarily known as somebody writing Christian music per se, this is a good example of it finding its way into your music. How, I think more in general, faith as an inspiration, for you as a creative person, is that something you can always draw on?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I just my faith is that I want to write songs. I want to write songs that are good, and songs that are honorable, and better songs. And if that tells you anything, I don't know, but I think my faith, especially in the latter years, has had an influence on how I write songs. And and a lot of times there are a few things I've written probably that you could just they could actually be Christian songs, but they're not. I've never thought of myself as a Christian songwriter. I write songs with a Christian philosophy sometimes.
Yeah, another song that I've goes a little bit in that direction. Is In a Different Light.
That
Doug
is my
Stone recorded that.
of Andreas, of all the songs that have been recorded, that is my favorite recording. I thought it's one of the neatest records I ever heard. Just the way it was produced. And I'm trying to let's see. Yeah, Doug Stone did it, and who was the producer? I'm trying to think who the producer was. Doug Johnson. Doug Johnson produced it, and I just love that. I just love the arrangement on that record. And it was like a lot of times you get a lot of songs cut. Sometimes you might be a little disappointed, and this is probably the most favorite song I've ever had recorded as to how it was recorded. I just loved it, and it was a big record. In fact, there's a funny story about that song. Doug had an album out. It had been out a while, and this, I think, they put it in the album, and I think it was the fourth or fifth single released out of the album. And when this song was released out of the album, it just took off. I think it was a double platinum album at the time.
Yeah, and that's whenever you get to perform that one. That's one of my favorite ones to listen.
Yeah, it's what I love to sing it. It's fun singing.
Yeah. There's one more that I don't think I've ever heard you play, but it's one of my favorites, and that's Someone Like You, that Emmylou Harris recorded.
Yeah. Alan and I wrote that one, and Emmylou did it, and it was a nice song, and she did it quite a few years ago. And I don't think we never. I can't recall at this time if there was even another recording of it. That I'm aware of, but she had a great record on it.
Are there any other songs that are your personal favorites, but not necessarily the best known songs? Is there any one or two that come to mind?
Oh wow, I've got one real sentimental favorite. It was not a hit. I recorded it on an album, but it was a song called Dana, and it was about my daughter. And I remember I wrote the song when she was about 6 years old, and I was just thinking about she's going to grow up and get married, and I'm going to lose her someday. And that was one of my, and nobody's ever heard of that song. It's in one of my albums. I couldn't even tell you right now which album it's in, but it was kind of a favorite song of mine.
Yeah. So we're here at Creative Workshop Studio, Buzz Cason Studio, and I know that you and Buzz go back a long ways too. How did the two of you meet, and how would you maybe elaborate on you guys' friendship a little bit?
Well, yeah, it's he was one of the first guys I met. I was still living in Memphis, and I was writing with Left Jack. As far as writing, I was writing. Alan and me both were writing for Screen Gems, and we came up here. Screen Gems had an office here. And we came up to do a demo session, and I met Buzz. I think I met him on one of the first trips up here. He was a background singer. Of course, Buzz has done everything, but he did a lot of background music, and we got him. And I think he was on my first Screen Gems demo session up here. And gosh, that was probably in maybe the mid '60s. But I moved here in '69, but I don't even remember. Buzz and I just really hit it off, and I mean we're close as friends today, as you know, and we've been friends forever. And he even cut a couple of my songs, but he's produced stuff on me, and we've done a lot of stuff musically. Plus, we're just good friends out of the music business. We see quite a lot of each other. We do a lot of stuff together. But he's had a great career himself.
Yeah, and the two of you did an album of you recreating some of your biggest songs as a songwriter and as an artist too.
Yeah.
That I really like. Is kind of a anthology of Dickey Lee, if you will, but new recordings of those songs.
Oh yeah, some of the old hits and all.
Yeah.
And we also did an album, Andreas, quite a few years back called Again. And it was, in fact, I got an email from a disc jockey in Australia just yesterday, a female disc jockey, and she said, I just played the title song out of your album again, and she said, I play a lot of your songs out of this album because it's the only album I have of yours over here. So I emailed her back. I said, if you would like, I said, I'll be happy to send you some more Dickey Lee CDs. So hopefully I'll hear from her, and I'll send her some.
Yeah. And Buzz and you also share a love for golf.
Oh yeah, we're two of the worst golfers in the world. But I'm better than Buzz.
Just to set the record straight.
Yeah, right.
But is golf and just the lifestyle of it and being able to go out in nature and relax, is that something that kind of balances your creative side some, or what do you get out of spending time on the golf course?
Oh, I think, well, first of all, I just love it. I love to play golf. It is, I love to be outdoors. I grew up on a farm, and I've always loved outdoors. When I was a kid, I'd fish and hunt, and since I came to Nashville, I've had very little time for that, but I love to get out on the golf course. I got a lot of friends I play with up here, and Buzz and I play a lot together, and it's relaxing. To me, it's like therapy. You just go out and do something a little different, and I think it refreshes me.
You got several awards during your career, but one that certainly sticks out is your induction into Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1995. What did that honor mean to you?
That's probably the greatest honor I've ever had as far as the music industry is concerned, and I had no clue. I never even thought of being in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and what made it even more special was Jack Clement. He was the inductor, when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. But it caught me completely by surprise. I couldn't believe it, and I still think there's so many people much more worthy than I am that are not in there. But I'll take it. I'm glad I'm in there.
Yeah, is songwriter the one thing that you consider yourself more than anything else musically?
Probably, I just think singer-songwriter. I love being on stage. I love singing my hit songs, and I love writing songs. And to me, it's writing it's almost, to me, it's like a puzzle. It's trying to put a puzzle together, and it's fun. And I've been so blessed to have been surrounded by so many great songwriters in this town who I've really learned a lot from. Especially Bob McDill taught me. Bob McDill taught me not to settle for less. Stay with it. And boy, it's hard to stay with it sometimes. You just keep going on. And I remember writing with Bob. We've written so much together, but we might be in a room all day long and not say two words. But then I found out later on something from the subconscious will come out that you'll come up with later, and probably if it had not been for those times of silence, we would have never arrived at what we arrived at. So I know when I had my first couple of hits, I thought, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to do this again. How's this going to happen? And I kind of got through that terror mode, and you think, well, you just stay with it. It's work, It's not easy, but it's fun at the same time. I always thought of writing songs as kind of like the game of Scrabble. You play Scrabble, you try to put these words together, and I've always tried to keep it simple, which is not very hard for me to do, as simple as I am. But you think in the game of Scrabble, it's all the little words you put in the right place where you score all the points. And I think I try to keep that simplicity about my songwriting and just come up with lines that really mean something.
Yeah. You've co-written a lot of songs, I think, especially here in Nashville, but you've also written a lot of songs by yourself, including She Thinks I Still Care. What's the difference to you in completing a song by yourself versus collaborating on it?
I think probably if you write something by yourself that you really that it's especially successful, I get a little more sense of fulfillment out of that. I've co-written more hits than songs I've written by myself, but when you co-write, I mean that's fun too, because that's the thing today, especially. But when you co-write, you have to be careful because it's easy to get a little lazy and let your partner wait for your partner to come up with something, you know. And when you're writing by yourself, it's all up to you, and you've got there's no feedback. You can't feed off somebody sitting across from you, but that makes it harder. I think writing by yourself is harder, but I think when you do write by yourself, you probably tend to really get a little more into it and work a little harder, trying to come up with the very thing that works. And sometimes when you're co-writing, you've got somebody you can depend on too. So, but they're both great. They're both fun and they're both satisfying.
Yeah, and you and your song have influenced a lot of songwriters coming after you. Are there certain songwriters that were an especially big influence on you, or somebody you kind of look up to?
Oh wow, there's so many. In fact, you know what's really funny? I've got close friends today that I looked up to that just knocked me out. Bob McDill. I think Bob McDill is one of the greatest writers that ever hit this town, and I'm so close to him. I think I don't regard him as much as I should at times, but when I stand back and look at some of the songs he's written, it's just fantastic. Don Schlitz is another one, and Pat Alger is another one as far as modern writers. But you know, back years back, I remember one thing I'll always regret. I met Harlan Howard, and he asked me one day. He said, He said, I'm going to give you my telephone number. He said, let's get together and try to write some songs. And I said, okay. And I never called him because I was so in awe of him. I was afraid that I'd embarrass myself just writing with him. So that's something that I really regretted, that I never got with him and tried to write.
When you write, or especially I guess when you wrote all through the 70s and 80s, were you specifically targeting an artist a lot, or were you just kind of trying to write the best songs and after completing it, seeing who it might work for?
Well, you know, I've found out there were a lot of times I was targeting artists, but 9 times out of 10, they're never the ones that record the song, you know, and I finally quit worrying about that and just tried to write good songs, because I remember one song that Bob McDill and I wrote called "I've Been Around Enough to Know" that John Snyder had a #1 record on. We were writing it. We were writing this song. We thought this was a female song, you know, and there were a couple of females that recorded it, but John Snyder did it and had a monster record with it. And yeah, you'll try to write songs for certain people sometimes, but it seems like when you're done with it, if it gets recorded, it's usually somebody else that records it. I don't know. I don't know why, but it's probably just the fact that you're targeting somebody probably helps you to write something, though. It helps you to get going and finish something. But usually they don't do it. Somebody else does. And you know, you think too. I know that I've started writing songs sometimes thinking I want to do this for so and so, and even before you get through the song, you're thinking of other people that could do this too. You know, so to answer your question, no. Usually, you target a song, you usually don't wind up with who you're thinking of.
Yeah. Today, are you still writing occasionally?
I'm writing a little bit. I'm not writing as much as I have been. But I've gone a few years here really without writing anything. But it's funny. I've just started writing again a little bit, and I've had some people come to me and say, "Hey, let's write." And I think, well, I don't know, but I've written a couple of things just recently that I feel really good about. But I tell you, the music today is so different, pretty much from the way I write. I feel like, you know, I'll never get anything recorded again today, and I'm not worried about that. But I've kind of started back writing a little bit. You never know what might happen. I'm not even writing with the thought of, boy, I hope I can get a record on this. I'm just writing just because I just love to write. Maybe something will happen with some of the stuff. Maybe it won't. I don't know.
Yeah. One thing that amazes me every time I see you perform is your voice still sounds like the records, even when you sing your very early stuff. I mean, are you just a lucky guy, or are you just trying to be healthy? Because usually that doesn't happen, but
Well,
you still sound like the guy who sang those great songs in the late 50s.
well, I still sing them in the same keys I recorded them in, and I don't know. I think they say use it or lose it, and I've never stopped singing. I'm still out on the road. I don't do as many shows nearly as I used to, but I still do a few shows every year, and I'm always singing. I'm always keeping my voice, and I work out. I've worked out my whole life ever since I was 13 or 14 years old, and I think that's probably one thing that's helped me. But like your voice, I mean, your throat, you've got your vocal cords, they're muscles, and you got to keep them going if they're going to sound right, I think. So I don't know. Some people, have seem to have lost their voices as they get older, and some don't. And I can't explain that. I just know that I've taken pretty good care of my voice, and I have worked out, and I've been blessed with good health, and I would have to think that that's part of it, and just singing all the time. I never quit singing.
Yeah. And now I heard that your music might make it into space.
That's a pretty funny story. I've got a fan. He emailed me, and he works with NASA in the space program, and he emailed me one time. He was telling me he really liked my music and all, and he said would you like for one of your songs to go to Mars? And I said, what do you mean? We were emailing back and forth, and he said, we're sending a flight to Mars. In fact, in 2018, the month of May, and he said, they're going to take pictures, and of course it won't be manned by people, but it'll be, it'll land on Mars and do all kind of experimental stuff, pictures and everything. And he said, would you like for one of your records to go to Mars? And I said, I think that'd be fantastic. Maybe I'm probably the first artist that will have a record on Mars. I don't know if I'll sell any up there or not, though, but I think it's pretty cool. I think it's just really fun, and it's a fun thing to talk about.
If there's one Dickey Lee recording or a Dickey Lee song that needed to make it up there, which one would it have to be?
Well, he asked me. He said, which song would you like to go up there? And I said, you know what? I said, just the chance that I've got a chance to get a record to Mars, you pick. I don't care. So I don't know what he's gonna pick.
Thank you so much, Dickey, for spending your time with me today and sharing all these wonderful stories about your career and your life in music. And I would like to wish you all the very best for everything happening in the future, and hopefully I'll get to hear you perform many more times.
Thank you, Andreas. It's been a pleasure being here. I've really enjoyed it.
This was the 15th episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. We taped it at Buzz Cason's Creative Workshop recording studio in Nashville. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Until next week.